Sorry about that interruption. I just wanted to put my watch down so I can keep track of time. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. First question I wanted to ask you. I've noticed last night when we first met at a gallery that there were an enormous number of selfies being taken. And backstage we just took another few selfies. What is it with the selfies? To what extent is this part of your art?
First, it's very nice to be here. You know, we all live our life and have our moment, but as artists, you always have to make sketches, diaries, or some trees to mark the time. So taking selfies is very convenient to meet people or people you may never imagine you will meet. And somehow they always come back. They will tell me, my mom have met you, see, this is a selfie, this is a proof. And it's such a wonderful technical possibility.
Well, if one were to be pretentious, one could say it's perhaps a little bit like an old Chinese tradition of poets getting together to get drunk and recite poetry, and they would very quickly write poems to remember the occasion.
Which is true. I mean, the most poetry if we read from Tang Dynasty or Song Dynasty, is just come from 80%, 90%. Come from this type of working, yeah. So that's the traces. That's part of our memory. You know, think about 100 years later, if they say my selfie with someone, they think it's some kind of phenomenon. So.
Yes, I mean it's a long way from a Tang Dynasty poem to a selfie, but
it takes too long.
Yes. And the best Tang Dynasty poems we can still read. How long do you think most selfies will last?
Well, as long as technology is there and the sunshine is there, and as long as our curiosity to wonder why that moment we have been together, since, yeah.
To what extent is it, I could see that a selfie is part, I'm sorry to be a bore about the selfies, but reason we take them is to remember something. To what extent is your art and the use of social media and so on also a way of chronicling, of keeping a record of your own life, that it's your personal life that goes into the art through remembering it by photographs, emails, and so on?
It's a very interesting question you're posting. I don't think I have a personal life, and I don't think I have another life. It's like Andy Warhol once said, this is not another layer of me. What you see in my work is me, and there's nothing deeper than that. So I think he's very honest and very clearly tells that. Without those moments, we don't have a more profound or deeper meaning. Even there's one we couldn't really even understand.
Yes.
So those simple things are beyond our understanding.
But I'm thinking, for example, there was a kind of literature in Japan, especially in the early 20th century, called the I novel. And the I novel was writing very, very in great detail everything that happened in the private life of the writer. So it was completely sort of narcissistic, you could say. And yet it was a sort of chronicle of a life. It made art out of the life. And when I think of many of the things you've done, your work with the earthquake victims in Sichuan, for example, and the use of emails, on the one hand, it's about a public issue. It's about the victims of an earthquake. On the other hand, you could also see it as a record of your own life and your own engagement in the world.
Yeah, it's about a curiosity. It's about our very basic sensitivity about justice and fairness. If you see 5,000 young kids, students disappeared, it's certainly first thing you want to ask, if the number is correct. Do they have a name? And do they have birthday? And all those things make you can really touch the very core idea about who are they, to find out that, to find out who is me or myself.
Could you perhaps say something about the Sichuan earthquake to put it in context? I mean, why it was so important to keep those names?
2008, before the Olympics, May 12th, it's just 2 weeks later from now, Sichuan had a major earthquake. Well, the earthquake took about 80,000 people's life. And among these 80,000 people, there's about 5,000 students disappeared. So in China, if 80,000 farmers' life disappeared, people accept it. Think they build their own house. The house is not regulated by state, and it collapsed. People killed by somehow their own fault, their poorness, their ignorance, but students are built by state, the schools, should meet all those standard procedure. It should not be a collapse, but about 20 schools collapsed. The apartment building next to it not collapsed. So obviously, I think is some kind of corruption or mishandling, which is very common almost in every project in China, if it's state project. So, of course, in China, you cannot really question that. So I can ask, who are those people? And so just by asking these simple questions, I made over 200 phone calls in 1-2 days. Those days I was like crazy. The answer is, you're not supposed to know. They even say that's a state secret. So you must be some kind of spy to interest in those. So I started to make internet some kind of organized citizens to investigate ourselves, which is not so difficult because I was very keen, very active on Chinese internet at that time. It's not possible today because we have a much severe censorship today. But at that time, Chinese government is not very prepared. So we organized 100 students or young people to do citizen investigation, we call it. So we sent groups to the earthquake area and start to go through village by village, door to door, to ask the victims and just to find the names and who are they. And we made documentary. Of course, we've been arrested a few dozen times. And police would tear off our investigation or brutality and erase all those photos or recordings. But they still don't know what to do because every day I will post our new findings on my blog. Till one day, 2009, they totally shut off my blog. And later I have a lot of struggle, argument. And it caused my detention and also some injury.
And of course, the corruption you're talking about is that developers who built these schools would deliberately use cheap materials and get kickbacks, and so in an earthquake they would collapse. Now, there are various ways that you could approach a catastrophe like that. I mean, there is the journalistic way in trying to report it in the media. You can be a historian. You can be an artist, or an activist. To what extent? Where do you put yourself in this spectrum?
I put myself. The job we do is like a researcher, journalist, lawyer, activist, artist, and everything together. We are so successful, and it's like crazy. And that's why I get all those troubles.
It's also why you're very famous. Is fame itself, do you think, I mean, the use of the social media for good or for ill, certainly can raise one's profile enormously. In a lot of modern art, Andy Warhol, I think, was one of the pioneers, but fame itself becomes part of the artistic project. Would you sympathize with that, or do you think that's nonsense?
Well, we're living in modern society. Fame is some kind of vehicle, but like all vehicles, it can bring you good or can be devastating. So my case is I have to travel 150 locations in past less than 3 years, doing over 500 interviews, sit on stage. You can see me, I see you in darkness. I cannot even use my phone to photograph you. So, you pay, and tomorrow I will travel to another city. And, it's a very hard job for me. It's not something I would enjoy that much. I have to leave my son alone. He's 9 years old. And, but it does something good. I think there's a lot of energy. And as an individual, you get this kind of fame, but you also owe a lot to those values and the people who support you, and they share the same kind of ideas. So
the good that you're aiming at is to use an old-fashioned term, to raise people's consciousness, to make people aware of suffering, of the problems in the world, of politics and so on. Is that the main aim?
No, I would say it's very selfish. It serves myself to recognize who I am. It's a constant discovery of who you are. I mean, I don't think we're born with that knowledge. We have to make that experience and knowledge through all those difficult situations, such as now.
Which is and constant travel and exposure to people and so on is one way to gain that knowledge.
I think to bring you into unknown area, to meet with a stranger, to talk with a scholar, and to take a selfie on street. To wake up in the middle of night, to wondering which hotel, which city you are in, and trying to find a Chinese restaurant, all those together. So that make you understand, okay, this part of a society, how would they live their life? And also, besides that, this kind of political or human rights issues and artistic expression, museums and casinos, all those things working together.
Do you ever feel that you would like to ideally stay in one place and withdraw and make things with your hands and not be bothered with the rest of the world?
We are staying in a place anyway. We are sitting in this little village called Planet, which is large enough for us to wandering. And, we shouldn't worry about that.
But the planet's still a pretty big place.
It seems getting smaller and smaller.
That is certainly true. So part of your expression then is to show how small the planet is, and that wherever you are, sitting on a stage in Chicago or being interviewed in Berlin or setting up an exhibition in London, it's all part of one project.
I think the only mysterious part is humans' soul and their heart. If you walk on the street, basically all those big cities are the same. They sell same product. The price range is about the same. They all have a poor area, They also all have McDonald's and Coca-Cola. I mean, it's traveling seems, it doesn't make that much sense, but still, it touches people. You see people leave a message on your Instagram. Sometimes those sentences just like a poetry. It's you make you wondering who this guy writes that sentence.
Yes, but you could also take a more critical view of this. I remember the writer Zadie Smith once wrote a very good essay about Facebook, where she took a critical view that Facebook gives people the illusion that they're interacting with other people and showing an emoticon, a kind of smiling face or a thumbs up, and it gives you the illusion of getting into the soul of people, if you like. But it's a very superficial way of relating to people. There is no real human interaction. It's all digital.
Well, I don't know about it. If we talk about profound way, then if we go to a supermarket, we buy something, we have to know where this product come from, who has made it, and how this is being produced, and what is the all those issues, and then we cannot even make a one step. It's just depends how you look at it. The superficial life is really part of our human's desire to know more, but at the same time know nothing. So this is human nature.
Yes, I understand that. Let me ask you a completely different question. People more or less of your generation who grew up in the Cultural Revolution, many people I've spoken to told me that because the schools were closed, they were sent to the countryside and so on, that one way that they would get their education was from their parents or from books that were out in the streets in great piles because people had to throw away old books and that kind of thing. How did you get your first artistic education? What was the first art that you saw that appealed to you?
That's very, very hard to answer because I grew up in a family. My father was a poet, studied in Paris, 1930s. Then in my family, of course, there's a lot of collections of art books, poetry, and probably that's the first moment if I start to read poetry and to look through those impressionist prints or Rodin sculpture. Maybe that's the first moment.
But when your family was sent to the countryside, to the north, I think it was, northwest, yeah. How much was your father able to take with him?
He's not allowed to take anything. We don't have any furniture with us. I was just born. Somehow they managed to have some milk powder. So, I still can. You don't have fresh milk. I was just born. So he was exiled for 20 years by communists, but he was original someone who initiated the revolution in literature world. But of course, the communists, after they get the power, all those, they really just don't like all those intellectuals, so they try to get rid of all of them. So he's one on the top. So when I grew up, I never see him as a poet, but as someone who bears the title anti-revolution, which is the most severe crime you can have. So, yeah, I see a few poetry books, but later I have to burn those books with him because those books keep bringing the people come to our home to searching for some kind of evidence of counter-revolutionary. So we have to burn all those books together.
How old were you when you were sent to the countryside?
I was a few months old, to north, then later to northwest, and he spent 20 years in that condition.
Were you ever angry at your father for being a counter-revolutionary and getting the family into trouble?
Well, if I have another father, I certainly will be angry with this father. The problem is you only have that father,
And when you grew up, at what stage did you begin to appreciate that he was a great poet and an artist?
I never really appreciate, I left China in 81, and the moment I left for New York, I said I will never go back. So for 12 years, I never really got contact with my family, never went back. But by 93, he was ill, and I told myself this probably is the last excuse I can go back to China. So I went back, and not a few years, he passed away. But it's very strange, till 2011, I was detained in a very secret place. I was sitting there with, the police sitting in front of me and just look at me. 24 hours, they would not say a word. They just look like, not like a real person. So that time I started trying to remember, bring back all the memories, because basically you have to let your mind work. But then I started to think about my father. Then I realized he gave me more than I could ask for from anybody, So that time I started to appreciate, being with this man.
But he was no longer alive then?
Oh, he's dead a long time ago, If he was, he would not believe I would be arrested. But I had a very happy moment that time when I was arrested. I thought that bring me even with my father. He was being put in jail many times. I always ask myself, I will never have that chance to meet his, I'm not jealous about his literature achievement, he's such a powerful, very powerful man, but I always jealous he can spend so many years in jail, which is an inhuman situation. I don't think I could do it, but, ended up, I also being put in jail.
So it made you feel closer to your father in some ways?
I feel so close. I told the police, I said, 80 years ago, it happened to my father, same kind of accusation, subversion of state power. And today, I'm quite proud to be part of it.
Your father was from a generation, as you say, who renewed poetry and so on, and was a modernist and probably was rebellious against sort of Chinese tradition in many ways. But he still knew the Chinese tradition. He was still educated in probably reading classical Chinese literature and that kind of thing. Since the revolution, so much of that has been destroyed. And it must be very difficult for a Chinese artist, whether you're a writer or a poet or a painter, to still work in a traditional manner, or to really to modernize it, because people don't know enough about it anymore. It's been cut. Is that one reason why conceptual art has become so common in modern Chinese art, so that it's about ideas and renewing something which is cut off from its traditional roots?
Yes, but first we are being forcefully, very brutally cut off from our so-called tradition. And basically we all switched to a modern language, which is called Baihua, which is completely vocabulary-wise, or sentence are very much like a modern language, modern English language, rather than anything to do with tradition. By changing the language, the meaning totally changed. And also the language, so much vocabularies are in relating to Russian Revolution vocabularies. So when we grow up, the only education is to get rid of the past. Anything old, which means not good for the revolution. So that is that's kind of mindset. Whole nation becomes so purified in this extreme brainwash for decades. So as a rebelling, young kids, you don't know what you're really against, but you only have this attitude to say you're not trust the system, you're not trust the communist. But you don't know how and why, because you don't have this knowledge or any kind of supporting intellectual base. You cannot really make an argument. You often see children, they don't like something. They know they don't like it, but they cannot really make an argument. So that's our generation. And at the same time, there's no commercialization like today. The art can be sold, or there's gallery or collectors or museums, or people appreciate the art. Art is a dangerous act. So there's a lot of mental activity, which you can call it more close to conceptual art. But you even don't have any magazine or newspapers you can print a piece of art. So I guess that's how, mentally become more active in certain period of time. As you mentioned before, in Japan in the 50s, 60s, China in late 70s. But now the art is totally dominated by the market.
But it's a very peculiar market, because in the case of Chinese art, and I wonder what you think of this, that one thing that became very popular, especially with Western collectors, was the art made by people of your generation who kind of turned Mao Zedong into a kind of Mickey Mouse figure. I mean, almost as a sort of a cartoon, and a lot of painting is of Mao and of Red Guards and so on. And Mao was probably the biggest mass murderer of the 20th century, and you cannot imagine German artists using Hitler in that way, or even Russian artists using Stalin. How did Mao become a sort of Disney cartoon?
Well, Mao is not exactly like Hitler, and still you have a strong influential in the 60s student movement in Berkeley or in globally. And it always have this ideology in supporting the third world nation against the American imperialism. So that kind of idea still functioning today in many areas. And the way Chinese artists did is very much like a Chinese cook did. If they open a restaurant in Chicago or Germany or Berlin, they will still call it as a Chinese dish, but it doesn't taste exactly like Chinese. It tastes more like a hamburger to Chinese food. So.
You mean the art produced like that, it doesn't really feel Chinese?
They try to please Western collectors. They recognize their values in Chinese art. They said, okay, that's something we can share.
I see. And how can you avoid that as an artist if you work in a big global art market? To some extent, all artists have always tried to please their patrons. I mean, in the Italian Renaissance, people had to please the popes and the church and so on. To what extent is this avoidable?
Well, you're trying to get the top secret from me.
Tell me.
My answer is not really you can, it doesn't apply to other artists. I don't care. I don't give them shit. Sorry, that word cannot use. And that's my answer clearly. I don't cook for anybody. I cook as I pleased. So.
But you did just teach me a new Chinese expression in the green room, which was the stick that stirs the shit. What is the shit that you're trying to stir?
Well, it's all different kind. You don't want me to analyze, because my father used to be 5 years professional to clean toilet in the very bottom of society, 13 toilets in a village. So if we talk about shit, the hours will be much longer than this. I can tell you all kind. Male, female, now you even have a bathroom in between. So, yeah.
Well, yes, but that wasn't quite the shit we were talking about.
You really like that?
Yeah, I like that. Because it started off with a remark about President Trump.
Ha.
And
there you go. We have a very leftist intellectual.
This is important. And I was saying that one reason I think he's very dangerous is that he's appealing to the sort of worst and most violent instincts of people, and you've quite rightly said that kind of shit is always there, and he's like a stick that's stirring it. And then you said, I like to stir shit of a different kind, so I would like to know what that is.
So seems we have to spend some time on shit.
I think so.
Oh, well, it's, shit is deep and profound because it's a byproduct of our human, it's part of us. We all have some shit with us, traveling or sitting or in discussion about it. And I never think Trump is a problem. I don't think he's dangerous. Even, he appeared a little bit ridiculous sometimes, but he's just symptom of our deep illness in this society. He's a product of this so-called democracy. He's elected. Of course, the left would point fingers, said he is there because Russians. I don't believe in that. I think he's there because he's there, and he's leading this nation, and he's talking about American interests. He presents American values in certain degree. I don't think we should just simply say he doesn't belong to here. And I'm sure he's going to maybe also bring more surprises, but we all part of it. So we have to, if we're not satisfied, this is democratic society, we have perfect rights, so-called freedom of speech or citizen rights and all those rights. So we are the only one to be blamed.
Yes, well, that is of course true. To what extent, since you're sort of traveling all the time and you're living mostly in Berlin and so on, to what extent do you still keep in touch with Chinese politics, and what do you think can be you're laughing at me?
Yeah, I'm happy you switch shit to something else.
That conjured up a smile. Okay, we will no longer talk about shit. Although the Chinese politics could be described as such to some extent. So to what extent do you still keep in touch with it? And do you think, and that's not just you, there are many Chinese artists, dissidents, intellectuals and so on, living abroad in the United States, in Europe and elsewhere. To what extent do you feel that you could still have some kind of impact in China?
Well, China is another really issue. I'm a Chinese. I still hold a Chinese passport. My mom is in China, and my studio is still in China. I have 40 cats in my studio in China. So every day, you can see how much I feel about China. But same time, I'm away, and I'm in somewhere I don't even know. I'm traveling, and I did almost everything I can do in China. I've been put in jail. I almost finished my life in this kind of brutalness. Going through this all kind of argument. I write over 2 million words on blog, in argue every sense. I become speechless. I said all those disgusting, brutal sentences about China. Now I'm speechless because it seems I'm a total failure. And I used to dream about revolution. I think that can happen in years if I can keep talking on internet. Then end up being detained and being, and pushed out. So seems I'm no longer to have that kind of struggle because I have to worry about my son's life. He's only 9 years old. I don't want him facing the same situation, as I grew up. So I have to move him out to Germany, and I try to spend more time with him. And, just walking in the park with no civilians, no police, walking behind you, taking photos, record your conversation. And there's no a second of so-called privacy. I don't care about privacy, but still you don't like someone always sit next to you trying to intimidate you. That makes me really angry. So let's talk about struggle. I think human rights in anywhere is connected. We're defending this very essential value. If we defend the rights of somebody from Myanmar or from Middle East or from Turkey, is same as I defending any human rights in China. The problem is not Chinese government. It's going to be finished sooner or later. But the problem is our understanding of human rights, human dignity, and human conditions. So I'm quite relaxed now.
Okay, well, on that note, there are some questions from the audience which have been put before we started. And I will read the first one, which is, in about 2005, you were photographed dropping what was said to be a 2,000-year-old Han Dynasty urn to make an artistic point about breaking from China's history. 10 years later, do you have any regrets regarding the destruction of another artist's work? Did the destruction of one of your painted vases in Miami during an exhibition in 2014 change your views?
No. It's very hard to change my views. That's the problem. I may be break or shattered, but change my views is almost not possible. And yesterday I visited the Art Institute. I see exact same vase I broke that was in presentation. And it's a beautiful show. I have a moment of about values, about what is creation, and how we would have a conversation with past. It's quite philosophical. Can we create a language without create a new form, or is that possible? So yeah, it's just for 1 second. Then I move on to see the Impressionist work.
But the irony is that you yourself quite rightly pointed out how artists of the post-revolutionary generation are cut off from the Chinese tradition and the Chinese past. And yet, the act of destroying a Han Dynasty pot in some ways suggests that even your generation still feels the past as a kind of weight on your shoulders.
Well, the one thing I have to be clear is I destroyed the Han Dynasty vase. But the guy from Miami destroyed my vase, which is very different,
Yes, but the point is, the reason you destroyed that vase was a comment on the Chinese past, no? And how to deal with the past.
I'm still waiting a lawyer from a Han Dynasty to sue me.
Okay, question number 2. I've always admired the way you deploy humor in your art. I lived in Shanghai when you installed WeiWei Cam and thought it was such an effective tool to highlight the government's absurdity. It's easy to think of a political art as being very serious, but could you speak to humor in art as a political tool?
I think somehow the humor is the most powerful tool when you're facing a most very brutal dictator. Because the weakness of the dictators has no humor. Even they're so laughable, but they don't know it. So when they put 25 civilian cameras in front of my compound, I wonder, why don't I just invite those cameras into my bedroom or my working desk? So I set up some cameras there and broadcasting 24 hours a day. And in a few days, millions of people watched how I sleep and how, all the sense. And then suddenly security people called me and said, WeiWei, shut off your camera. I feel so good that moment, I said, is that you want to know more about me, and now I trying to give total of myself to you. So they cannot take it. They think that's too much.
No, you're right.
So I said, art always wins.
You're right. No, I was thinking of Charlie Chaplin's film, The Great Dictator, that he made before the war about Hitler. And it just made fun of him. And Charlie Chaplin regretted it after the war when we knew about the Holocaust and so on, and thought it was frivolous to make fun of something like Hitler and the Nazis, but actually it was very effective. And Hitler was furious about the film, perhaps more furious than about any other film, which is to prove your point. But question number 3. As the standard of living improves for many Chinese people, do you think they will become more complacent or less complacent in the face of repression of their freedoms by the Chinese government? I think the meaning is that as people get richer and better off, that they will become less political, mind less about the kind of repression that there is, because they can live better, and so will be less interested in...
I think this question should ask someone else, like Trump or someone else,
Trump has never heard of China. He's probably heard of China.
But he's quite rich, and who knows what kind of connection he has with China or Russia. You never know today. It seems you have a history of China, Russia, or Saudi, but they may, as cousins or families, and they're so friendly that we can think about,
Well, I think it's not a bad question, because it has always been the assumption of many people in the West that if you can, through capitalism, make people better off, they become more middle class and so on, then they'll want democracy. And the counter-argument is Singapore, where the government created order and made it possible for people to become more middle class, more comfortable and richer, and it didn't lead to more democracy. It made people more conservative. And we know that the ideal that Deng Xiaoping had for China was to turn it into a huge Singapore. And do you think he's succeeding?
I think the assumption the richer will demand more democracy is totally one of the big lie or failure. If we say, I think the people become rich or more prosper, only think about how to reduce their weight or to eat better, or to be skinnier, or It's nothing to do with democracy. So, and also you may produce a monster and, which scares everybody. So that's the answer.
Do you think that China will become like a huge, giant Singapore?
No. China is, Singapore is, the size are very different. China has its own long history, their own illness, or own character, and also a lot of profoundness. If you see the jade and those early bronze, you see how profound that society was if you compare to other civilization. So China is very difficult to answer. China's problem. This communist 80 years of control, it's a very small, fragmental time. So, but certainly China is a potential big problem to the planet. Talk about the environment, education, corruption, lacking of a moral foundation, destroyed so many things during these past 30 years to catch up, to make some profit. They basically sacrificed everything.
And what do you think should be the answer to that? I mean, some people say, well, children should be taught Confucian morality again, or what?
Then we have to go back to shit again. I think we stopped that discussion.
Well,
we don't have much time left.
We don't have to go back to shit. I know that was we were talking about the burden of the past, which I think is a really interesting question in the history of China. And the generation of your father and your grandfather thought that Confucianism was shit, and so they thought, if we can't destroy the tradition, we can't be modern. And then the communists did something similar, but even more radical. So what is the answer today?
I think the whole world is eager to get modernized. The modernization is not just from China, it's from everywhere. And this efficiency, the idea of capitalism, the technology, everything attracts the whole human. But at the same time, it creates a tremendous problem, the problem bigger than we can imagine. So we are all in this kind of journey, which can be suicidal to human as a race.
And what is the role, and this is my last question, what is the role of the artist in trying to make the best of things?
It certainly is not an artist's role, but for somebody cleans toilet, you want to make it clean, and you want it to make less smelly, and you can easily finish the job. So.
Yes, no, of course it's not the artist's role, and the artist doesn't really necessarily have to have a role. Artist doesn't have to be political and so on, but you've chosen to be active and political, and so that is a role.
I think I was chosen. It's not my choice to be like this. I'm very much followed some kind of call. I don't even understand why I ended up like this. I'm a product of some kind of unknown forces, maybe anti-China forces,
So you're the black hand of the...
I could be always black hand in every of our act.
Well, I think that's a very good way to finish our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.